You're watching live from Paris with me, Sanam Chantier. It's 11 p.m. here in the capital. A reminder of our top stories. Lawmakers in Missouri pass a bill criminalizing abortion at 8 weeks of pregnancy. 7 other states have passed similar laws this year alone. A breakdown of talks between the British government and the opposition Labour Party. Jeremy Corbyn blames government weakness, while Theresa May hits out at Labour divisions over another referendum. Also coming up this hour on France 24, Taiwan becomes the first country in Asia to legalise same-sex marriage, with the debate over the act, both in Parliament and in the public, has been deeply polarising. Thank you for watching live from Paris. We start with Missouri, where the House has passed a sweeping bill dubbed Missouri Stands with the Unborn to ban abortions at 8 weeks of pregnancy. The legislation is said to be among the most restrictive in the US, but would include exceptions for medical emergencies. Missouri on Friday joined Alabama and several other states that have moved recently to severely restrict the procedure, sparking a wave of activism across the country. Earlier, I spoke to our correspondent Philip Crowther. Let's take a listen.
This bill in Missouri would be, if it's signed into law, and it is expected to be signed into law by the Republican governor of the state, it would be one of the most restrictive in the country. In fact, it would make abortion illegal after 8 weeks and no exceptions for rape or incest. And doctors who would perform an abortion, well, they would risk up to 15 years in prison. Now, as is the case with many other abortion bills that have been passed in other states over the last few weeks and months, there are and there will be several legal challenges that might take it all the way to the Supreme Court here in Washington. Now, the one that we were talking about, well, just 24 hours ago, that was Alabama. Even more restrictive. That was a bill also signed into law by the female Republican governor of the state. That made it a felony in pretty much all cases for a woman to have an abortion. And in those cases, doctors were facing decades in prison. And there are others, as you mentioned. The states of Kentucky, Mississippi, Ohio, and Georgia have also passed so-called heartbeat bans. Now, what they mean is that women, cases where there is a heartbeat detected in the fetus, in those cases, abortion would become illegal. These are all very restrictive measures in very conservative states. Again, they are not law automatically, even if the governors sign them into law, because there is a superseding federal law. That one, of course, having been passed in the Supreme Court.
So you just mentioned Alabama. Of course, Missouri is becoming the 8th state to pass this new abortion ban this year. This is seen by many as a risk to, of course, nationwide abortion rights, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's where the Supreme Court comes in. And the 1973 decision by the Supreme Court, it's called Roe v. Wade. That is the decision that did make abortion legal in the whole country. Abortion is indeed right now legal in the whole of the United States. Now, that does not stop individual states from passing these bills. It doesn't stop governors from signing them into law, but they don't become law because there is that superseding Supreme Court decision. And what's interesting here is that a lot of these cases are not meant to become law. They are challenges to the highest court in the land. The goal, in many cases, is to get these bills in front of the Supreme Court for that Supreme Court to reconsider whether to make abortion illegal or legal in the whole of the country. Now, the reason why there is this movement toward the Supreme Court is because the highest court in the land has changed under the presidency of Donald Trump. There are 2 new conservative judges, Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch, who might overturn that Roe v. Wade decision from 1973. That is the hope that a lot of conservatives have in this country, that one of those most important decisions could actually be overturned because of these individual bills that are being passed right now in individual state houses and governors' mansions across the country.
Next to Brexit and yet another hurdle this Friday, the opposition Labour Party has finally pulled the plug on last-ditch negotiations with the government, leaving Britain's rather turbulent divorce from the European Union again in disarray. This after the embattled Prime Minister Theresa May said she will agree a timetable for the election of her successor after she puts her Brexit deal to a parliamentary vote in the week of June the 3rd. France 24's Emerald Maxwell brings us up to speed.
It was an effort perhaps always doomed to fail, with both Labour and the Conservatives divided over Brexit, and Theresa May reluctant to make concessions that would infuriate her divided party. Talks to break the Brexit deadlock have collapsed, and both sides are blaming each other.
There have been areas where we have been able to find common ground, but other issues have proved to be more difficult. And in particular, we haven't been able to overcome the fact that there isn't a common position in Labour about whether they want to deliver Brexit or hold a second referendum, which could reverse it.
Opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, though, put the failure of the talks down to the instability of May's government. She's under pressure to put a date on her promised departure and call a Conservative leadership race. Many in her party are already lining up to take her place at number 10.
Are you going to be standing for Tory leadership then? Do you think you're too divisive to be Tory Prime Minister?
Labour fears any compromises would be torn up by May's successor.
The Prime Minister has announced the date she's leaving. There have been increasing noises off stage by Conservative cabinet ministers and others who don't agree with much of the talks or any of the discussion we're holding, so we are concluding the talks.
The winner of a leadership contest will automatically become Prime Minister and take control of the Brexit process. But May wants the Brexit deal ratified before she steps down. Corbyn, though, said there was now no chance of that happening. The Prime Minister is planning to put it to a vote in the week of June 3rd.
Emerald Maxwell reporting there. Now, ahead of the European elections next week, Emmanuel Macron has hit out against his far-right opponent's party over the last 5 years, calling it a, quote, disaster. Polls have been showing the French president's Republic on the Move party and Marine Le Pen's RN running neck and neck. Macron's dissatisfaction rating remains high amongst the public as he continues to ignore demands from the yellow vest protesters, that's the Gilets jaunes, and ploughs on with reforms. Let's listen to the French president speaking earlier this Friday.
They are there. They are the ones on their way out. What did the Leavers do? They voted against all the projects that France has defended in Europe, including the ones to protect us. When after the terrorist attacks, the French government, and it was then François Hollande who was president of the Republic, just managed to push through policies to better protect our airports, to better record and prevent terrorist acts. Which political forces did not want to vote with us? The National Front. And so, on a whole host of subjects, their record is a disaster for the country and for Europe.
Over to Poland, a country deeply shaken by a recent documentary that revealed cases of sexual abuse by priests. Lawmakers have since voted overwhelmingly to raise jail terms for convicted paedophiles to a maximum of 30 years. This upheaval comes just 10 days before a tight race in elections for the European Parliament. Here's our correspondent Gulliver Cragg reporting on that documentary, Only Don't Tell Anyone, which has sparked outrage in the Central European country.
This film really is a phenomenon in Poland, it's fair to say. Everyone in the country is talking about it. It has a strong emotional impact because you see these victims of abuse decades later confronting their abusers, and the guys admit to it and suggest financial compensation, also express great remorse, and they're, old men at the time when you see them in the film, but you see the anger and the pain that the victims are still feeling. And then, of course, there is all this information in the film about the ways that the church covered up sex abuse by priests and moved priests to different dioceses. I mean, all of these things are not completely new information to Poles. There have been news stories about it in the past. There have been scandals about this already, but it was really all brought together in this one film, and I think it's the film that has finally opened the floodgates in Poland. The most important charity that helps victims of sexual abuse by priests say that they've been having dozens of calls since this film came out from victims who are now finally got the courage up to come forward.
Turning our attention to Taiwan, which legalized same-sex marriage earlier this Friday. The bill will go into effect on May the 24th. This is a landmark first for Asia and a major victory for the island's LGBTQ community. The issue of marriage equality, however, has bitterly divided Taiwanese society. Some 67% voted to reject same-sex marriage in a referendum last year.
A victory for hundreds of activists who came to celebrate a historic vote for Asia. Moments earlier in the Taiwanese parliament, politicians passed a law making Taiwan the first Asian country to legalize same-sex marriage. Outside, there were scenes of joy and relief.
Today is a very significant day to us because we could finally pass a law. We've been fighting for this change since for 5 years for me personally, before I even had children. And now that I do, it means even more.
I think that only by gaining legal rights can you make people acknowledge that this group of people exists. That's why this vote is essential.
The debate surrounding gay marriage has been at the heart of Taiwanese politics for the last 2 years. In May 2017, judges ruled that it was unconstitutional to prevent such marriages, but opposition groups fought to prevent a law from being passed, a thorn in the government's side, despite the legislation being one of the president's key campaign pledges. On Twitter, Taiwan's president said the country had taken a big step towards equality. Over the last 10 years, Taiwan has been one of Asia's most progressive countries in terms of gay rights. It's also the organizer of the continent's biggest gay pride parade.
Andrew Hillier reporting there. Moving on to Algeria, where protesters flooded the streets for the 13th straight even Friday. Members of the opposition movement, in a show of defiance, climbed on top of police vans that were blocking the main demonstration site. The country's security forces, as seen in these images, for their part, fired tear gas to disperse crowds in the capital, Algiers. The opposition movement has been calling for the departure of the remnants of Abdelaziz Bouteflika's inner circle, the former president who was ousted last month. Let's get more with Monsef Aidkassi, who's standing by in Algiers for us. Monsef, more protesters on the streets this Friday, certainly in comparison to the last. Tell us about the mood. Of course, you did spend some of your day in that rally earlier.
Well, as you just said, this 13th Friday was much, gathered much more people in the streets than the previous Friday. Algiers was actually crowded. A few incidents have actually happened. They were due to the fact that the people, the police used tear gas at times, but without any gravity. So it is described on Facebook, for example, as a magnificent atmosphere in Algiers when people talk about that moment when a huge Algerian flag had been waved and demonstrators were, debating the current political situation. So this is the second Friday of the holy month of Ramadan. Thousands of Algerians preferred to leave their homes to take to the streets, and I can assure you that the weather was hot today, according to the protesters, but this was not a reason for them to stay home. So they took to the streets to declare and to demand the departure of the whole system, Bedoui and Ben Salah.
So defiant they continue to be, Monsef. 13 weeks on, as we said, and this showdown between the opposition movement and the government continues. Is there any way out of this deadlock?
Well, actually, you know that tomorrow is going to be the last day where, the candidates and the personalities are supposed to run for, the election, the presidential election, but no one has done it yet. And the people who take to the streets reject these elections, which are programmed for July 4th. So I think that we are expecting the cancellation because the people who take to the streets are clear and don't want to participate in this presidential election. So for the moment, it's too early to talk about what is going to happen tomorrow. But if we are referring to what is happening in the streets, the Algerian people are so clear and their determination is expressed every day. So they don't want the presidential election and they don't want that Bedoui and Ben Salah stay. So maybe they can be cancelled, but we don't know. We don't have any official information for the moment.
A determined opposition movement there, as described by our correspondent, of course, Monsef Aid Kasi, reporting with the latest developments from the Algerian capital.